during that time, I studied under a bunch of really good professional writers, most notably Vance Bergeli, who was my advisor. And Vance, the way the Writers' Workshop works is basically you can go out there and you do not take a conventional graduate curriculum, which means that you do not concentrate on criticism. Mm-hmm. You concentrate on doing the writing.
Sure.
And then you write and you submit this stuff and everybody sits around and reads it, and then you get responses from pro writers. And you just do that till you're through. And a little bit of, and you have to take a secondary art form of some kind. In my case, I did drawing, got a C. Lucky to get it, too. Emerged from this with a degree in, it's really a 60-hour graduate program, and the emphasis is on creativity. Iowa, you can do it in, you can do screenwriting, you can do pottery, you can do basket making, you can do a whole, any art form, you just go work. It's an apprentice system.
And you weren't actually required to publish or have a document for publication?
Not a bit. You had to write them some. In my case, I had to send them a story that indicated that I had some promise. So I sent them a story, and they said, hey, you have some promise. And then for a thesis, you do a so-called creative thesis. In my case, I didn't. I just sent them 4 stories. So my thesis consisted of 4 stories, which they said, yeah, that's okay, that's good enough, here's your degree, so long.
And you have wound up as an associate professor of literature in Boston at Wheelock College.
Yes.
But you did begin writing novels, and I love the story of your first one because it was a surprise to all when it was classified as a crime club selection. What did you start out to write? Well,
I did, and for many years after that, I just wrote stories that sort of interested me. And I had an interest in medieval things and antiquities, and I had written a novel or 400 pages of a non-novel, how it turned out. When I was in graduate school, I decided I should write a novel. So I started writing this novel, and 400 pages later, I just quit. It had gone all, I had no form, it was a disaster. But I had 400 pages of prose fiction under my belt. So I think I wrote one other novel, I can't even remember what it was. And then I wrote a novel that ended up being published when I was 35. And I wrote that novel. It's a story about a bunch of people who go looking for the tomb of Beowulf. Because I got this notion in my head that just like Schliemann found Troy by reading the Iliad,
right,
and there turned out to be a Troy and the Mycenae, I thought, well, maybe there was a Beowulf. I liked that idea, like the Prince Valiant intruding upon my life once again.
Was he Scandinavian?
Yes, Beowulf was a Geat who lived on the coast of what's now Scandinavia. The story was first written down in Anglo-Saxon, so it's somehow the story got from the coast of Scandinavia over to England probably about the year 600 and was written down about the year 800. And I won't go on with the miraculous survival of Beowulf, which is quite just happenstance that we still have that poem. But I was fascinated because of the revelations, not only the intrinsic merit of the poem, but it reveals a lot about the society of that early, quote, Dark Ages period. So I hypothesized this notion that there really was a Beowulf. And then I set about trying to figure out how I could prove that. And this first novel I wrote, which, by the way, was written on my noon hours while I was working during the summertime at Al's Package Store in Edgartown, Massachusetts. I'd take my lunch out to the back room and I'd write for an hour and then I'd go back to work. And that's how that book was written. Then I sent it off to the agent that I'd met in Gerald Warner Brace's class 10 years before, and she sold it to Doubleday. I was happy. I thought, I'm a writer. I'd always wanted to be a writer. So romantic. You know, I always thought writers. I think it was Hemingway that made me think that writing had to be romantic, you know, African safaris, beautiful women, Paris in the 20s, all the great stuff. And I was now a writer. And then the book came out. It was a Doubleday Crime Club selection. I said, what? There was no crime. And the New York Times crime reviewer noted the same thing. He says, I'm not quite sure why I got this book. There's no crime. My own theory is they didn't have a category for books like this, and that seemed like there was a kind of a mystery, you know, was there really a Beowulf? And I think that was the hang-up.
Well, you know, also a book like that is plot-driven. It's an action book. As you say, it stems from your interest in Tarzan and Prince Valiant and whatever. And mysteries are plot-driven. And
Yeah.
you know, I myself, for purposes of our inventory, always include what I call guy books or action-driven books. I love them. Alistair MacLean, those wonderful
Oh
sea
yeah, he
adventures.
moves them right along.
Right in the Jack London tradition, you know,
Sure.
H. Rider Haggard and that kind of Elizabeth Peters, who writes Victorian melodramas about a female archaeologist. One of them, she broke into pure H. Rider Haggard mold. It was absolutely marvelous. Sent
love
them
it.
off to Nubia, you know, and they were digging up a lost city and all this
Yes.
stuff. I love those kinds of
Oh,
books.
me too.
Rogue Mail by Jeffrey Household, I consider
One of
to
the
be an
great
absolute,
classics.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Spy stories, that whole thing. So I can certainly understand why a subject like looking for the, you know, mythical Beowulf,
Yeah.
which I really always thought was an Anglo-Saxon legend. So I'm surprised to find out it's Nordic.
Well, it is an Anglo-Saxon legend, but
But
it
I
really
meant-
all takes place in Scandinavia. And the question is, how did it get over? And the answer, obviously, is came over with the Anglo-Saxon invasions.
Sure. Well, you can see that my own reading went back to Chaucer and came to a screeching halt. I've never read Beowulf, but I think it sounds like a marvelously exciting book.
It's
But now you were 35 and you've written the Beowulf book, which
And
is
I'm a
a
writer.
Crime Club selection, and you're a writer. And then what?
And then I wrote another book, and nobody bought it. And then I wrote another book, and nobody bought it. And
What were you writing about? Well,
oh, I was writing. I think I wrote another sort of a mystery adventure story of some kind, and it didn't sell. It sort of teetered on the brink of selling. At least that's what my agent told me. But didn't quite sell. Meanwhile, I'd started another one, and I wrote a huge, big. Somewhere in this next few years, I wrote a gigantic historical novel, which was again based upon the Vikings and Columbus, two of my interests. I was fascinated by the fact that the Vikings had, and Brendan and a bunch of those guys had gone across and really run into North America in the 8th, 9th, 10th century. In fact, there was a Scandinavian colony on Greenland for 400 years, starting about the year 1000. They had religious ties to Rome. They had steady trade to Iceland, 400 years. And then Columbus, there's good evidence that Columbus sailed to Iceland before he went to America. He was a master mariner. He went up there, and I'm pretty sure that he got to Iceland. And he got to Iceland probably about 50 years after the last ship from Greenland got back to Iceland, and that Greenland colony was lost. I figure he knew there was something over there. He took it back, got some financing, and found it. But he found it on the south. So what interested me about it was the big circle. It was almost like a mandala. The Vikings had gone across, and for 500 years had lived there. And just as they pulled back, Columbus goes across and finds the same place. So I was interested in this big circle idea. So I created a story about a Viking. They wanted who gets to America, but who doesn't come home, who stays there. And hundreds of years later, the last descendant of this Viking meets one of the Spanish conquistadores coming north with Coronado.
Sounds like a marvelous.
I loved it.
Of course you did.
And nobody could buy it, couldn't sell it. So that was one story that I wrote. I just reread it, by the way. I dug it out and said, was this any good?
I was just going to ask you, is it still in a drawer somewhere?
No, I got it out about 3 years ago and actually looked at it just last year after 2 years of being too busy to look at it. It really needs serious revision. I mean, the idea is great, but the writing needs major league
But maybe that
revision.
was its fate. You know, maybe it was a story that was waiting for you to further hone your craft so that when you did
Yeah.
write it, it would sell. I mean, I think that's sort of an exciting
Yeah.
thought. It's been waiting back there in its own dark ages,
waiting
for
to come back,
Craig
yeah.
to get better
Well,
so
you know,
I could do
I
this.
think I might do that. I thought
It's
about
a great
it.
idea.
I read, then I thought, well, that's a good idea. So then I picked up, I wrote a Western novel, the only one I ever wrote, which is, if I got this straight, the hero of that is a descendant of the contact that's made between that Viking guy I mentioned and the Spanish conquistadores. So in 1835,
Right?
this kid living now in the wild mountains of the Sierra Nevada has a series of adventures that lead him up to about 1870. And so it ends up being this huge, big family kind of
It
cycle.
really is.
And I reread that one, and that one's not bad.
Well,
Looks pretty good.